Hello, friends. Welcome. If we've met before, it's great to see you again. And if not, hi, it's great to meet you. My name is Taylor, and welcome to Taylor's Table Talk because there is indeed a table here. Today, we are doing a deep dive into Our Flag Means Death, Season 1. I was about to say Season 2. We don't have that yet. Today we are doing a deep dive into Our Flag Means Death, Season 1, Episode 2, A Damned Man. If you have not seen already, I have been reacting to Our Flag Means Death. I've already watched Episode 1 and 2 and done reaction videos on that, so you can see my reactions, some thoughts on there, a little bit of everything. I've also done a deep dive on Episode 1, and in these deep dives, I am just going more in depth with the episodes, with my thoughts, opinions, things that maybe I haven't picked up on or thought about as much before, and just kind of sharing that all with you. I'm also going to change up formatting a little bit and remind you to subscribe and hit the notification bell if you are interested, and also like this video if you liked it. But now, let's dive on in. Also, I feel like it's important to mention the writer's strike with the WGA that is happening right now. All my other videos previously were filmed before the strike had happened, and now that it is going on, it is important to talk about because writers are such a vital piece to media in general, for film and TV, for everything that you watch. You seriously would not have anything without writers. And right now, especially with how big streaming has gotten, it has been clear how unfairly that writers have been treated with their pay wages, with how they've been treated, and just overall, I think, undermined throughout this entire transition when it comes to how we watch movies and TV with streaming platforms. And they deserve the fair compensation that they deserve for the amount of hard work that they do. Seriously, I cannot be any more clear about this. We would not have the wonderful, amazing shows and media that we consume without them. Writers are truly the heart and the brains simultaneously of these shows. We would not have the characters and the stories and these worlds that we love so much without them. We wouldn't have Our Flag Means Death without the brilliant writers of this show. Just as one example. Truly any show that you love yourself, you would not have it without them. So as this strike goes on, please support writers and respect them during this time and respect their choices for this strike because they are so incredibly deserving of so much more. But now, let's get into episode 2. I have literally my notes ready. I've written essays at this point. Also, if you see me glancing down at all, it's just me referring to my notes because I had a lot to say, apparently. Now, there is just such a wonderful build in the beginning stages of this season. I mean, throughout the entirety of it as well, but just in this very beginning, it is just all so very well done, and I, again, cannot praise the writers more for just how well done it is. I know I've mentioned it before, and I'll mention it again like many other things, but this show just really does a really good job about not overcomplicating things and not having to be an overly complicated show. And I think it's very consistent in not asking too much from the audience in terms of them trying to understand what is going on. It is very good at being able to either explain with just the characters or explain visually what is going on and why something is going on. Also, it's not trying to speak down on the audience or treat them like they're dumb or be patronizing in that way. It is, I think, done with great consideration of the audience because it is a silly, goofy little pirate show. It is camp at times. It is not your general expectation for what a pirate show would be. And so it very much allows you to breathe in this world and understand what you're going to expect throughout the entirety of the season. But also it's not creating cheap jokes out of it. It is, I think, all very well-crafted comedy altogether. And I think episode 2 is a wonderful example of all of that. Again, we are not getting overwhelmed with information, but instead getting a great opportunity to learn more about the crew. We are learning more about Steed and the effects of the events of the previous episode has had on him. And we also get introduced to 3 new characters, and I think just done in such a seamless way as well. And like I discussed while talking about episode 1, there's a great thing they do about avoiding the consequences of, like, the major consequences specifically of Steed's actions and the effects that it will have later on. while I think we moreover focus on like the minor consequences. You know, right now we are dealing with more of the hostages in the sense of they're kind of just getting dragged around over the place and they're escaping, and that pulls Stede and Pete and Olawande into this whole adventure of trying to get them back. And then what progresses into episode 3 as well, not to get into that one yet, but again, it's more focused on those British officers, and we start to, for a brief moment, forget about the fact that there was somebody who died who was a British officer on that ship, and that will have major consequences for Stede later down the line, whether he knows it or not, because I don't think he's even considered those consequences himself. He's moreover having to deal with his own guilt, whether or not it actually has to do with Nigel or not, but he's dealing with his own guilt, that he's not even thinking about the fact that, you know, hey, maybe the British won't like this. Also, I just find it interesting, and I don't know if it was actually like intentional or not, but I just find it incredibly interesting how, in a way, the show mirrors Stede in the way that we kind of bury down the consequences and avoid it and try not to think too hard on it. And I think that's a great representation of what Stede does with a lot of his guilt, a lot of his past trauma, things like that. He kind of buries it down, and I think very much like in the show, it all starts to burst at the seams. The same thing happens to him, that because he buries it down and shoves it down, it also starts to burst at the seams and come to head, and there comes a point where he's like, I kind of need to address this, don't I? Again, I don't know if that was intentional, but I do think it's very interesting in a way of how that kind of mirrors Stede and his character. Speaking of Stede, like I said, we learn more about him, and this time I think we really learn. We learned last time about his past, we got introduced to him, we already started to gain this knowledge about the kind of person that he is, and now we get a better sense of who he is. Again, we start to see this mediator side, this very parental side of him that we continuously see with how he is often trying to make sure people don't get into fights. He's like, hey guys, let's not fight. Why don't we just lie down and relax on the beach and do nothing? Or when Olawande and Black Pete start bickering at each other, and he's like, guys, don't fight. Olawande, don't take the bait. Like, he very much takes on that mediator position. On top of learning more about him in that way, we also are seeing him trying to fill this leadership role, which I think ties into him trying to de-escalate at times and mediate in those ways, and I think that is how he views leadership. He's not trying to start fights or arguments with people. He views it in a way of like, let's just try to keep the peace, let's not argue. I don't like the arguing, and I can't blame him. I also am not an argumentative person, so I can't blame him on that front. And also how we had learned about his trauma in the past episode, we now start to see this guilt that he carries on himself, and we start to glimpse into when he leaves his family and abandons them, basically, and kind of just disappears into the middle of the night, and how that kind of ties in with Nigel and his death, because there is that moment where he's like, you know, I don't even like the guy. I'm not even too mad about him being dead. And him getting confronted with, well, are you feeling guilt about something else? And I think that was a great moment where he gets told, he's like, you have to confront these sort of things, or else it's only going to get worse. That's why, you know, you are seeing this ghost of this past bully of yours who has reappeared in your life, who is now part of that guilt and is now pulling all that other guilt to the forefront of your mind too. And like I said, you keep pushing that down, it's gonna eventually burst at the seams, and it may not be right now, but I think he gets forewarned in that way of like, if you don't confront this, it's only going to get worse. Oh boy. But now let's talk about the crew a little bit, because like I had said in the rewatch, and I've already mentioned a little bit now, this episode we definitely start to see a bit more of the crew and their personalities shine through, especially since this episode was not as much Steed-centric. Like, we of course still had the plot line that involved Steed, but now we had other ones that were not revolving around the thoughts and opinions and conversation of Steed himself. And I think this episode just had a really great way of showing off the crew's personalities as well, with having them be on this vacation with the ship being run aground, and just seeing their personalities come through, being like, what do you mean vacation? What we're pirates, we don't do vacation. But seeing how they like to relax or have fun, and we see Wee John and Frenchie getting all excited about blowing things up. We have Buttons, who's just whittling and discussing all types of fish and sea creatures, and Lucius, of course, wandering off and getting himself into his own trouble. And meanwhile, we have Jim, who we learn a little bit more. We are still kept on edge about what their actual story is, why they are on the ship, why they are in disguise, while we still have not been given the reasons as to why we do see them have a moment to themselves, and of course until Lucius stumbles upon them and gets himself into trouble with Jim. We also get more discussion of Blackbeard. I think in episode 1 he's definitely teased like a little bit, but he's not overly talked about, whereas this episode we definitely start to get a little bit more in there. We open up on Black Pete telling a story about his time with Blackbeard and being on his crew. Whether or not that's true or not, but I don't know, like Buttons has said, he had me until the flip, so was he part of the crew? Who knows? I think, like I said before, I think it would just be hilarious if he actually was, and he's just spitting stories like crazy and they're highly inaccurate, but he still was somehow part of the crew. But anyways, we do get more of this discussion of Blackbeard. We have Steed asking Black Pete, like, later on, well, like, oh, is this what Blackbeard would do? And he's like, no, this isn't. And Steed inquiring more and more about one of the world's most infamous pirates to ever sail the seas. While, like I said, we're introduced to 3 new characters. We have Izzy, Fang, and Ivan showing up like the boy band that they are. And we later on get that reveal that they are part of Blackbeard's crew. And we get that beautiful shot of suddenly seeing Blackbeard's flag with the most dramatic music happening in the background, and you just get, I personally get so excited, because it's like every time you're inching closer and closer to seeing him and knowing him, and we get to see him next episode, which also, like, I think I put a spoiler warning in this, but obviously there are spoilers. We see Blackbeard next episode, and we've been getting just such this awesome build to his character, and just it's kind of cool in the way that, like, the first 2 episodes we don't see this guy at all. We are just going based off of rumors and lore. We actually don't know anything about him, and so when we finally get to meet Blackbeard, it's very fun how the expectations are one thing by the audience and by the crew, and then you meet him and he's not exactly what everyone's expectations are, but not in a bad way. Now, okay, let's get into final thoughts. Now, this was a thought I actually had while watching Ted Lasso, because they are, of course, different shows, but they both fall into the same realm of workplace comedy. They both start off with also just focusing on kind of your more main character and learning about that character specifically, why they're here, what's going on in their life, so on and so forth, and we're following the story of them. But as time goes on and as these episodes go on, they both do just an excellent job of creating these very deep and caring connections between characters and audience, and being able to follow and branch off with these other characters' storylines. With Our Flag Means Death, it's with the crew, and you want to learn more and more about the crew. And with Ted Lasso, it's with the football team. It's with anyone in association with Richmond as well. And on both ends, you just want to learn more and more about all of them. And while it starts off about these main and lead characters, it does develop into such beautiful ensemble shows, and I think both shows just do an excellent job at that. But to give final thoughts on episode 2 itself, I think it's just a very well done comedic episode, and again, it lets you learn more about our characters themselves, but I think it's just a really good, funny episode, and I think it is definitely a bit more of the more comedy heavy episodes. Of course, every episode is exceedingly hilarious, but I think we don't get into some of the more serious stuff until a little bit later on, to where you start to see a slight bit more balance between the comedy and the seriousness. This episode, I think, was allowed to be a little bit more silly and goofy, and even though it's a show that is silly and goofy and at times can be a bit lenient with its historical accuracy, I think it does a very good job at knowing when it is the appropriate time to bring up the more historically accurate things for that time. And it doesn't shy away from those things that historically happened. It addresses the colonization, the racism, slavery, and it continues to have that awareness throughout the entirety of the show. And it maintains that understanding of how it fits into a show specifically like this. And in the end, I know I'm only 2 episodes in, but I've seen this show before. I don't have any negative critiques for this show. I truly just have an abundant amount of enjoyment with it, and I am just so excited to continue with this rewatch and to have all of you following me along throughout this little journey. But I think that's all I have to say for today, so I'm gonna wrap this up right here. And I said it before and I'll say it again, so please feel free to subscribe and hit the notification bell. You can also find me on my other social medias too, and also feel free to hit the like button, or also comment down below if you have any thoughts, if you have anything you want to continue off of, maybe something I said, or maybe you agree, disagree. The world is your oyster there, so feel free to comment. I would love to hear your thoughts on everything as well. But yeah, I'm going to finish this up right now, and I'll see you next time. Bye! I could have said anything, and I said the world is your oyster. Delicious.